Hi, this is Tom Does Tech. I'm Tom, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to create this sentiment analysis engine. So sentiment analysis will take a string. So I'll say this is awesome. And it will measure the sentiment of this string. So this sentiment is happy. And if we put something in here that says this is really bad, you can see that the sentiment of this one is negative. And if we put something in here that's neutral, so we say this is something, you can see the sentiment of this one is neutral. And sentiment analysis is useful for a lot of different things, not just showing emojis on a screen. And I challenge you to use your imagination to come up with a really cool project that uses this technology. You could do something really cool like scraping tweets and analyzing the sentiment of those tweets. So let's get started building this sentiment analysis engine and this React front end. So I'm here in VS Code and I'm just going to initialize my project with yarn init. And as always, this is going to be a TypeScript project. So I'm going to say npx tsc init. And this will create a tsconfig file for us. I'm going to make a new directory called source. And I'm just going to touch an app.ts inside the source directory. So touch source app.ts. Then I'm going to install some required dependencies. So we need express, and this is going to be for our API. We need stop word, and that is to remove stop words. And these are words that don't mean anything, like or but. We need this spell corrector, and that is going to do exactly what it says in the name. It's going to correct the spelling of words. We need this apos to lex form. And this is going to convert words to their lexically correct form. So that will convert I am to I am, or your to you are, for example. We need natural, and this is going to do the sentiment analysis for us. And we need cause, so we can accept requests from a different front end. Once those dependencies have finished installing, I'm going to install some dev dependencies. So I'm going to install ts_node_dev, and this is so we can start and watch our server. I'm going to install TypeScript, and I'm going to install some types for natural, stop word, express, and cause. And if you open the GitHub repository for this application, you can find a notes file, and this will include all the yarn add commands that you need. So now that we have all of our dependencies set up, I'm going to open package.json. And I'm going to add a scripts. And I'm just going to add one script, and this is going to say dev. And this script is going to run ts_node_dev. I'm going to give it a respawn flag. Then I'm going to tell it which file to watch. So source/app.ts. And if we open up our file, we can say console.log. Hello world. And if we type yarn dev, we should expect to see hello world appear in the console. And we see hello world here. And when we save this file again, it should restart our server. So we're good to start going. So the first thing that I'm going to do is create a function called getSentiment. So I'm going to say function getSentiment. And this function is going to just take one string. And there's a few functions that we need to run on this string before we can analyze it for its sentiment. So the first check we need to do is if string.trim, if not string.trim, then we're just going to return 0. And this function is going to return either -1, 0, or 1. And -1 is negative, 0 is neutral, and 1 is positive. So if we trim this string and there's nothing in it, then we're just going to return 0 because an empty string is neutral. So the first thing we need to do is convert words to their standard lexicon. So I'm going to say const lext equals apos to lex form. and I'm going to pass in our string, and I'm going to import this library. So import apos to lexform from apos to lexform. Then I'm also going to convert this string to lowercase. And I'm also going to remove any characters that aren't A to Z in upper or lowercase. So this will remove things like exclamation marks, dollar signs, hashtags, any special character. The next thing we need to do is to tokenize the word. And so this will essentially turn the string into an array of words. So we'll say const tokenized equals tokenizer dot tokenize, and I'm just going to pass in lext. So we need to import tokenizer from natural. So I'm going to import from natural, and I'm going to import word tokenizer. And then I'm going to say const tokenizer equals new word tokenizer. So the next thing to do is to correct the spelling in the words. So we can import spell corrector. And you'll notice for some of these libraries, we need to add tsignore. That's because they don't have any types in their package, and they don't have a definitely typed package. So let's say const spell corrector equals new spell corrector. Then we're going to say spell corrector, and we're going to spell corrector correctly. Dot load dictionary. And this is spell corrector with a lowercase s. So we're going to say const fixed spelling equals tokenized dot map. And we're just going to map through each one of these words in the string. And we're going to try correct the spelling on each word. So I'm just going to say word. Then I'm going to call spell corrector dot correct. And I'm going to pass in the word. The next thing to do is to remove stop words. So I'm going to say const stop words removed equals stop word, and we can import stop word. So I'm going to import stop word from stop word, and then I'm going to call remove stop words, and I'm going to pass in fixed spelling. So let's just console log this out for now. And see what this looks like. So let's just return 0 to keep TypeScript happy. And we can call this function with a string. So I'm going to say console.log. And then let's also log, let's do some logging. So you can see that with our stop words removed, this string here just gets narrowed down to awesome. And the second string just gets to let's and logging. So the next thing to do is to create an analyzer. So I'm going to import sentiment analyzer and porter stemmer from natural. And then I'm going to say const analyzer equals new sentiment analyzer. I'm going to pass English in as the language. I'm going to pass in port stemmer. And then I'm going to pass in A, F, I, and N. And this is the vocabulary. So now let's call analyzer on our last string here, stop words removed. So I'm going to say const analyzed equals analyzer dot get sentiment, and I'm going to pass in stop words removed. Now let's console log our analyzed. So you can see here we get a 4, so this is positive, and then we get a 0 because this here is neutral. It's not positive or negative. Let's try get something to give us a negative number. So let's say this is really bad and it sucks. You can see here, this is really bad. This is a -2. So let's normalize these numbers a bit so they fit within a range that we can work with. So let's say if analyzed is greater than or equal to 1, we're just going to return 1, and this is going to be positive. If analyzed is equal to 0, we're just going to return 0. Otherwise, we're just going to return -1. You see awesome is 1 or positive. This string here is neutral, and then we get a negative here. So this function looks really good. Let's move it to a different file. So I'm going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this NLP, or Natural Language Processing.ts. And I'm going to use app.ts for our REST API. So I'm just going to export this function here. And let's remove this console log as well. The first thing I'm going to do is to import Express. I'm going to say const app equals Express. I'm going to say app.use, and I'm going to say express.json, and this is so we can accept JSON bodies. I'm going to say app.use, and we're going to use the cause module. So we need to import cause. And the origin is just going to be localhost port 3000. Then we're just going to say app.listen, and we're going to listen on port 4000. And when the app is started, we're just going to console log app is running. And we're going to log out the port that it's running on. Sorry, the host and the port. And you can see we have a Express server running on localhost port 4000. So let's add a route to this to test it. So I'm going to say app.get health. And I'm just going to call res.send. And I'm just going to send a 200. So now we can curl this endpoint, and we should expect to see a 200 OK. And it looks like I'm missing a backslash here. And we get an OK. So let's add an endpoint for getting our sentiment. So we'll say app.get /API /sentiment. And I'm actually going to change this to a post request so we can post the string in the body of the request. Otherwise, we need to put it into query strings. So I'm going to say const data equals request.body. dot data. And say const sentiment equals get sentiment. I'm going to pass in the data. Then I'm going to call res.send. And I'm going to pass in sentiment as an object. And I'm also just going to return this. So let's switch over to Postman so we can give this endpoint a try. So I'm here in Postman and I'm going to make a post request. And I'm going to send this post request to HTTP localhost port 4000 /API /sentiment. And this endpoint requires that we have a JSON body. And it requires that we have data. And this is going to be our string that we want analyzed. So I can say this is an awesome API. And you can see here that we get a 1. So let's try something that is negative. And you can see here that we get a -1. So this is the sentiment analysis API part done. In the next part, we'll build a UI for this API. And the UI is going to be built with React and TypeScript. And we're also going to be able to debounce this request, which is quite interesting. So I'm back in VS Code and I'm going to use Vite to bootstrap an application. So I'm going to say yarn create Vite, and I'm just going to call it UI. And I'm going to be able to pick a template. So the template I'm going to pick is React. And I'm going to pick React with TS. So you can see here we have a UI folder. So let's cd into our UI. And I'm going to run yarn to install the dependencies. So now that the dependencies have installed for the user interface, I'm going to type yarn dev. And this is going to start it on port 3001. So I'm just going to stop whatever is running on port 3000. And I'm going to run yarn dev again. And this is started on port 3000. So we can come over to our browser and you can see we get a fresh React app here. So let's come back over to VS Code, open up the source directory and app.ts. So I'm just going to install one dependency for the user interface, and that's going to be Axios. So I'm going to say yarn add Axios. And this is so we can make network requests. While that's installing, I'm going to remove everything inside of this. And I'm just going to say hello. So I'm going to declare a couple of state variables. The first one is going to be our comment. And this is just the string that we want to get analyzed. I'm going to say set comment. Then I'm going to say sentiment. And this is where our sentiment is going to get stored. And that's going to default to 0. I'm going to declare a type for sentiment. So I'm going to say type sentiment. And this is going to be either 1, 0, or -1. And then I'm going to say our sentiment is of that type. So I'm going to add a text area. And the placeholder is going to be, what do you think? The value is going to be our comment. And on change is going to change our comment. So we're going to say set comment. This is going to be the event. And this is going to be e.target.value. So let's minimize this window so we can open this window up. Need to restart the server. So we have a text area here that we can type into, and this is going to set our comment. And every time our comment changes, we want to make a network request to fetch the sentiment of that string. So to do that, let's use effect. And I'm going to create an async function called fetch sentiment. And this is going to take our comment. And this is going to be of type string. So I'm going to say const result equals await dot post http localhost port 4000 /API /sentiment. And the request body is going to say data, and this is going to be our comment. Then I'm going to call .then. I'm going to say the result of that. I want to get res.data. Then I'm going to call set sentiment, and I'm going to pass in the result here. And our result is an object, and it has sentiment. And then inside use effect, I'm just going to call fetch sentiment. And fetch sentiment is going to take a comment. And then we also need to put our comment into the dependency list for use effect. So whenever we type in our text area, we should see a network request, and the network request should return our sentiment. So let's say this is awesome. And we do. We see a lot of network requests here, and we're going to debounce these. But first, let's display this sentiment on the screen. So I'm going to create a new component, and we're just going to call this emoji. And this component is going to take one argument. This is going to be an object that contains sentiment. And sentiment is going to be of type sentiment. And I feel like I've said the word sentiment so many times that I don't know how to pronounce it anymore. So I'm going to say if sentiment equal to 1, I'm going to return an image. And the source is going to be positive. And I'm going to import these images in a second. And I'm just going to copy this. And I'm just going to return the last one here as negative. And if it's equal to 0, it's going to be neutral. Let's also give these class names of emoji. So I have an images folder here, and this images folder contains 3 SVGs, one for negative, neutral, and positive. And you'll be able to get these SVGs from the GitHub repository that I will link to in the description below. So let's import these. And let's use our emoji component below our text area. And I'm going to pass in sentiment, and this is going to be sentiment. So you can see here that we get a massive emoji here. So let's quickly fix that with some styles. So I'm going to open up app.css. And I'm just going to replace all the styles in here. So we're going to give some padding to the actual app. We're going to add some padding and font size to the text area. And the emoji is just going to have a max width of 100 pixels. So you can see our emoji is a better size here. Let's say this is bad. And we get a frowny face here. And then if we have no emotive words in here, we just get a neutral face. So the last thing to do is to debounce these requests, so we don't make a new request every single time we type a letter. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call this use debounce.ts. And I'm going to import from React, and I'm going to import use effect and use state. I'm going to say function use debounce. And this is going to take a value and a delay. And the way that debounce works is that when the value changes, we will wait till this function is not called, and we'll wait by the delay. So whenever we type here, we will wait for whatever our delay is. Say we set it to 1000 milliseconds. We'll wait 1000 milliseconds before we call the network request function. So it's 1000 milliseconds from the last function call. So I'm going to say const equals use state. I'm going to say debounced value. I'm going to be able to set debounced value. Then I'm going to say use effect. And I'm going to declare const handler equals set timeout. Set timeout takes a callback, and it's going to take our delay. And this is going to call set debounced value as value. Then we're just going to return a new function, and our new function is going to call clear timeout. And we're going to pass in our handler. And then we're going to have a dependency array of value and delay. Then we're simply going to return our debounced value. And of course, we're going to export default use debounce. So now we have a debounce hook here, and we can type this out as a string, and our delay is going to be a number. So we need to default this to our value. Let's come back to app, and we're going to import use debounce from use debounce. Then above our use effect, I'm going to say const debounced comment equals use debounce. And I'm going to pass in the comment, and I'm going to pass in 500 milliseconds. So the way that this works is that when comment is updated, we're going to wait 500 milliseconds from its last update, and then we're going to set the value in this debounced comment. So if we now make our use effect hook dependent on debounced comment instead of the actual comment, this effect here will only get called 500 milliseconds after the last comment update. So I'm going to say if debounced value, then we're going to fetch our sentiment, and we're going to pass in the debounced value instead. So let's clear our network requests here. And if we type something really fast, you'll notice there's no network requests. And then all of a sudden we get a network request when we finish typing. So this is how to build a basic sentiment analysis API and a user interface to demonstrate it. If you like the video, please make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.